everyone, and bom dia. My name's Robin Harrison. I'm Global Content Director at Clarion Gaming, and I'm here with Ed Birkin from H2 Gambling Capital. And what are we doing today, Ed?
Dia, Robin. ¿Cómo está?
Tudo bem?
Yeah, un poco cansado?
Same as.
Well, today we're going to talk about the Brazilian market.
Yeah.
We want to say thank you to the Brazilian Lounge, muito obrigado, todo equipe Brazilian Lounge for letting us use this today. And yeah, we're really resurrecting the podcast right to the source that we did pretty much when everyone decided to do a podcast in 2020, I think.
Yes, so it was a bit of a pandemic baby, wasn't it? So for the uninitiated, and I mean, obviously we're assuming that the vast majority of the industry were listening to it back then.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly some issues with the counting and the review system because, you know, we didn't quite get the numbers that clearly people were listening to.
Oh, it's glitches in the system.
Yeah.
They were definitely there. They were definitely there. And so yeah, what were we doing in that one? And that's only half me asking because I am very tired. You know, I did land in Sao Paulo this morning. So what did we do in the last edition of this podcast?
I mean, we just gave insight. I mean, that's the
insight.
feedback, just insight, data. I mean, who isn't interested in gambling data, quite frankly?
It is one of the most interesting parts of the industry, so I'm very excited to do this again. And how are we going to do it differently?
Well, I think this last time we focused quite a lot on guests, and we are going to have guests, but not every week. I think like you guys just put out a lot of content, so I think the focus is what's interesting this week, talk about that, and hopefully at H2GC we have data behind it that we can add a bit of insight to people.
Fantastic, that sounds very exciting.
Well, that's a theory, but
yeah. I'm excited.
Well, we might as well give it a go to talk about the Brazilian market.
It seems appropriate.
Given we're in Brazil.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
And this is the second time, of course, we've been in Brazil this year.
It is. I mean, we should probably not refer to your outfits at the Carnival in this one. I
thought they were a very well thought out, very appropriate, and I really kind of feel like I was the most kind of engaging part of the whole carnival experience, you know. Well,
the glitter seems to have just about cleared off your head, which is quite fortunate with the light coming down.
I mean, there is a bit of a sheen. There is a bit of a sheen. This is the problem with being follicularly challenged and being in an environment with some powerful lights, which are also quite warm, because it is actually quite warm here.
It is now. Not when I left the UK and it's sunny and landed in the rain for the weekend. But anyway, enough about the weather. Brazil.
Yes, so Brazil. So we are into the 4th month of legal and regulated betting and iGaming. What are the numbers telling us?
Well, first of all, everyone says you come here and everyone's like, oh, Brazil's it's a different market to everywhere else. And I'm like, look, everyone says their market's different, but quite frankly, a gaming market's a gaming market. Or so I thought.
Okay.
Brazil's tough. It's really tough to get the numbers. So look, we're trying our hardest. Hopefully the SPA is going to put out some data on the legal market. And we've kind of stuck ourselves out there with some estimates, and hopefully we're not going to be proved horribly, horribly wrong and look shit. But look, we've done... So the legal market numbers themselves will be slightly different to what... Well, they'll definitely be slightly different to our estimates, but I think some of it will be very different to what we're saying, because for especially January and a bit of February, we've done our data based on what we think the GGR is of the operators who are now licensed.
Right.
Now, for a period of time, you know, not all of these operators were operating on their .bet.br site, which is the only legal site you do. I don't know, and no offence to the regulators, but I don't know if all the data is going to be captured, because I know they had problems in the system, or so I've heard, in the system that's capturing all the data. So how reliable these first numbers will be, I'm not sure. But put it into context, we reckon that the market in 2024, so before it was regulated, was about 25 billion reais, which in US dollars at the time we said that was let's say round numbers, $5 billion.
Okay.
Now you look at it and that's about $4 billion, you know, with the exchange rate going up. So it's best to kind of talk from Irish, but for people who don't know, the FX is somewhere, depending on the exchange rate, $4 to $5 billion dollars. So looking at what happened to the market in January, February, the legal market, we reckon these operators, be it still on their .com sites or the data that's actually going to go through as regulated, is about $1.5 billion a month. So down, 10-20% on what it was before. Now, some operators I've spoken to have said, January, you've got no chance, like it's a bloodbath, we're down 50-60%. Others say we're down 10-20%. I think there's a few issues with people having to sign up, a lot of searches.
The KYC requirements.
Yeah, so the search data kind of for betting sites with no sign up just kind of went through the roof, as you kind of get. But that's where I kind of think we are on the legal market. Again, a lot of people, a lot of the operators who are more casino driven are kind of saying it's 80% casino. You have some of the bigger guys, the kind of Bet365s, who are more betting focused, who I believe are kind of more sports side. So we've done, we started doing survey data as well, so customer survey data. We're running it quarterly, and I know you can't necessarily trust exactly what the customers say they spend, but if looking at their splits, they're talking about 55% iGaming, 45% sports.
So that's interesting, because obviously Brazil's traditionally seen as very much a sports-driven market, and that's not really kind of being borne out by the numbers then, is it?
No, and especially ours, because we're probably say our numbers are suggesting there's more sports than other people in the industry are saying. I think it's something we got, in the UK back in our earlier days, with the UK market at the time being more sports dominated, we can have assumed other markets would be the same. But if you look at some of the other markets in Europe, they are just 70-80%, some of them, especially in Eastern Europe, just iCasino. And it is. When I was watching a football game here the other day, and just on TV, there's 7 different legal betting brands in one shot, someone's taking a goal kick. So, it is very sports focused, but, what the operators do, they're probably like everywhere else, they're leading on the marketing, customer acquisition with their sports, and, how many of the teams don't have a sports betting main sponsor, and then just cross-selling into iGaming. And then the iGaming, if you look at the UK or something like that, it's 80% slots. Here, they're suggesting it's about 30% slots, 30% crash games, which is a big one, and about 30% live casino.
Okay, so it's interesting that you mentioned crash there, because previously we've kind of talked about this, the fact that products such as Live Dealer and Crash are really kind of talked up, but they're only really kind of achieving like parity with slots. I mean, is that in itself exceptional, the fact that they're achieving that parity?
Yeah, it is. So live casino is an interesting one. We get a lot of questions on our data saying, you don't have live casino taking share. We all hear live casino is the next big thing, or it has been the big thing. And look, it's just a great product, but the data we get, and we don't get it from everyone, all the regulators. But look at the UK. I mean, slots, and they report slots. That's about 80% of the market. 3 years ago, it was about 78%. So yeah, live casino is great, but it's still only a fraction of what slots, and slots is still taking share. But crash games, especially in certain markets, Brazil, Africa is just, I suppose, just because of all the bandwidth and everything, but that's really the one taking share. So if you're looking at the growth market, that's crash games ahead of live casino. But live casino is a great product and people want it. You need it on your site. But if you're going to be competing with people, it's having the slots. Like Tigrino. I mean,
of course.
Like everyone has to. If you don't have that,
it's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like Kyle from Kyle Goldsmith, from my team who looks after LATAM Beat, he was quoted by the BBC World Service talking about Tigrino, because they were covering that, and that's how much of a phenomenon it's become.
And they have influencers just talking about that now. Maybe I'm getting a bit old, but I understand the concept of the influencers. I don't really understand how people can just make so much money, or so many people actually care about what someone says. But when you've got tens of thousands of people watching someone talking about Tigrino on YouTube, I mean, it's just nuts. So it is a different market in that respect. But the biggest issue we're having is really trying to get to the bottom of the illegal market. And there's a lot of
this is interesting. So this is something that we hear a lot about in a lot of different markets. And there's a lot of figures out there, with that from various different providers kind of estimating, what the scale of that actually is. But in the context of Brazil, what's your kind of best guess? I mean, and is it just a guess at this point?
So, I mean, let's quickly talk about the wider illegal market. So, because H2 have been around for 17 or so years, you know, at the time we did the kind of offshore market, looking at people who were kind of licensed in Malta, and then saying because of our Malta license we can operate in Norway, we can operate in Finland or Germany, and it's kind of grey market. It's non-locally licensed, but it's legal. So our offshore numbers have always been pretty low and conservative because of that. I think that ship's well and truly sailed, that argument. So we're going through a process now of kind of increasing our numbers quite a bit for a lot of these markets, as we just say there's no grey market versus black market. You're either locally licensed or you're not.
Right.
And then we're doing like quite a lot of data, search data, website data, just some guys in building APIs to kind of just scrape more of the data we can to really stay up to date on the illegal market, you know, make our numbers a lot more scientific. We're increasing them, and just the growth we're seeing in the illegal market. I mean, if you were speaking to us 5 years ago, the general hypothesis is, you know, the illegal market's going to, you know, continue to shrink slowly as the legal market's growing, and that's just not being the case. Partly because of regulation, but also just the ease of access of it, and then cryptocurrencies and things like that. So the illegal market's booming everywhere, quite frankly. And Brazil, it's, I mean, some of the numbers. So when I came out here with yourself last month in Rio. Some people say, oh, you know, 60% of the market's illegal, and I'm, you know, looking at it and kind of going, well, you know, you've got the Betano, you've got the Bet365, you've got the Superbets. These brands are everywhere, and we've done unprompted brand recognition, survey data, and out of that, about 11% of the brands. So there's probably about 3,500 responses for this, and 11% were illegal sites. And out of the 3,500. The biggest non-licensed site had 11 people who knew about it. I'm like, this is not bigger than Betano, but that's not how it's working out here. So
right.
Europe, if you want to track players, Denmark, Finland, you know, Netherlands, wherever, you know, your aim is you go on affiliate sites and you just make your brand as well known as possible, and people come to you. And so that's how we do our illegal market analysis. We did the same for Brazil. So we use this product that tracks 3 million iGaming keywords. There's 33 million affiliate iGaming sites that do it, and we got a list of 1,700 sites that are targeting the Brazilian market. Okay. So then we get the market share for those, and we have a share of channelization in terms of visits. So it's about, you know, 10% of visits, web visits, if you adjust for bounce rate, so people leaving straight away, and adjust for how long people have spent on the site. About 10% of it is the legal operators. We know that generally the higher value customers spend more on illegal operators. That's just a general view, but also it comes out in our survey data when we're asking. So our survey data, we don't just say, you know, on average. It's, you know, we split it. Who are the high value customers? What do they do? Because they like things differently to the low value. There's no average player in iGaming / sports betting. So then we put a multiple of spend, and we get to kind of 28% of the market by revenue. We kind of go is illegal. So like, okay, that's fine. But then you start speaking to people over here, and there's data picks, which is the only really kind of payment transfer thing. And the amount of revenue, we don't have the data, annoyingly, but speaking to people in the financial industry that do have access to this, and the amount of data going through picks providers dealing with illegal operators is just huge. I mean, it suggests the market's just bigger than, quite frankly, the legal one. Now, arguably, you know, transactions are not related entirely to GGR. You know, maybe if you're betting with a 365, Betano, Superbet, Sporting Bet, etc., you know, you will put your money in and be happy to leave it. You know, maybe if you're dealing with some of these more questionable ones, you kind of put your money in, do it, and you pull it out. So there's going to be a lot more transactions per GGR, so you can't directly relate it. You know, we try and speak to some of the game suppliers, and, you know, under kind of NDA as background data, you know, what proportion of revenues they're still getting from unlicensed operators. You know, you're getting to maybe near around 40% of the market on that respect. And then there's the market which isn't even online, which is online, but the transactions aren't online. So when you've got the VIPs, there's a lot of Asian operators target the Brazilian market, where they're actually dealing with cash with local junkets, I suppose, for want of a better word, and then transacting online, and you're talking about tens of thousands of US dollars being bet on a single hand. You know, that skews the market.
Yeah.
So, at the moment, so we've got this number of the visible, but a number that's out there at the moment, and of kind of 60% is illegal. I don't think that's a number you can dismiss, but we are working hard with the operators, suppliers, with the we're trying to have conversations with regulators, at least with the trade associations, just to try and get a number out there that is a bit more than kind of finger in the air, that uses our data on the visible market, but also how we can get some data points on the invisible market, for want of a better word, that's harder to track, because we really need a starting point. And the problem is, as soon as you have a number out there, that's kind of out there and everyone uses it as a flagship starting point. So we work on that, but it's tough. But ballpark, 40% illegal, 60% illegal. We're a data company. We kind of pride ourselves on having better data than that, but that's something we're working on. I'm not going to sit here and give a number and say we're H2, we've got it, but it is a big number that's in the legal market. But as I try and say to some of the legal operators, that's not a bad thing. At the moment, I was like, you've got the market, so the market size, legal market size, is what the legal market size is. If you had 90% of the market, then that means your total addressable market is pretty much where you are now. If you've only got 30% of the market now, if we can channel more online, the opportunity for you is so much better.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, but I suppose really to make that happen, it does really come down to whether that's actually possible for the operators, because we see this in Europe, this over-regulation. Like, you look at a market like the Netherlands, you've got brands like Tombola, which is owned by Flutter, you've got Live Scorebet pulling out of that market because whether it's the tax alone is increasingly difficult to contend with. Then all these compliance changes, all these kind of little kind of tweaks to the kind of compliance, like reporting, whatever, all those technical, amendments are going to add up cost-wise. And then they're looking at product restrictions. And in Brazil, it's maybe not at that point, but we mentioned earlier, KYC is pretty hefty for the average player. And then there is talk about, kind of like limiting the market in, kind of a few different ways. One of the things, we talked about earlier today was kind of like blocking people on welfare from gambling. So that then takes all these people out of the legal market and gives them nowhere to go, and I suppose kind of in Europe, where we'd see that kind of popping up is, the equivalent of sites with, casinos not on GameStop pages, on the affiliate sites. So do you have any kind of insight on how these players are being kind of channeled into that illegal market? Like, how do you see these people as being kind of like lured into the illegal, offshore, invisible, whatever you want to call it, market?
So the first thing I'd say is, we're independent, and we make sure we're viewed as independent. So although yes, we have a lot of operators, suppliers who buy our data or do commission bespoke reports, we also work with a lot of regulators. We're quoted by regulators in Europe, and because they trust our offshore data. And regulators, I know that operators love to hammer them, but they have a tough job because they are trying to protect the consumer. That's part of their job. There's tax revenue and all that, but it's protect the consumer. But then if you try and protect the consumer too much and make it onerous, they will go to offshore sites. You cannot stop gambling online. It is just impossible. Like, you have to be so naive to think that people aren't going to gamble. It's just ridiculous. And I think the Netherlands is a really good comparison to Brazil, because there you've got politicians who, quite frankly, seem to hate gambling. Don't understand the market, don't understand what they're trying to do is going to completely screw it. It might as well be like Germany with your €1 slot. Like, it's just, I don't know if I can say this, but it's just gonna be fucked. And then you've got the regulator who actually understands what's happening, and then for them to come out and say, oh, by the way, we now think that half the market's offshore, and that's before they've put through all the different changes they're looking at there. And I think the Brazilian regulator's in a similar situation where you have the politicians who have passed this law, Bolsa Familia, whatever, probably got it wrong, that effectively says people on welfare can't spend their money on gambling. Look, I get that. That makes sense. At the end of the day, you've got people working, paying taxes to the state, who pay it in welfare benefits to people, and they go, well, this is to feed your kids and live. It's not to spend on sports betting. But now you've got 55 million people who want to bet on sports who can't bet with legal operators. So what are they going to do? They're going to go with a legal operator. We've already said that whether it's 40% of the market, 60% of the market's offshore at the moment, illegal, they're just going to bet off that. So if you think that that's going to help channelization, I mean, they've just got no chance. And as sad as it is, how are you going to stop that? Now, they have the benefit of the PIX payment system. I don't know enough about it, quite honestly, to see if they can really implement that to stop it. Something people talk about is, can we not have the suppliers say they cannot deal with, illegal operators? And that's just never going to happen, because quite frankly, there's just mirror companies. There's always people who are going to put it out there. And then the biggest issue I think that Brazil has is how the illegal market is being done. That it's not as if there are these big brands that they can see out there and through affiliate sites. I mean, I wish it was. Then my job would be easier, and I could give you a more accurate number of the illegal market. But when you've got people using Telegram, Instagram, you've got I know there's a big crackdown on influencers last year, and there's laws on it, and some people arrested. But again, you can't stop everyone. And you've got people with 20 million followers, that kind of put betting sites on there, go to betting sites that aren't even branded. People will bet. So do I have confidence that channelization is going to drastically improve in Brazil? Not really, and I don't think it's the regulators' fault. I think it's just part of it is well-intentioned legislation that is just out of touch with the reality, that people will bet regardless, and now you're just sending them to places that aren't regulated. And a question I had from someone, which I thought was very interesting, is not all of these illegal sites are actually gambling sites. They pretend to be gambling sites, take your deposit, and then that's it. You don't even play with them because it's just a scam. Should that count towards the illegal gambling market, or is that just fraud?
It's an interesting point, and it's interesting when you raise about the role of the regulator, because the regulator is essentially, we always talk about operators being squeezed in the middle. One side they're getting pressure from the regulators, the other side, in Europe especially, they're getting pressure from society, and you could argue in the US as well. At least there's, there are individuals and associations kind of whipping up anti-industry sentiment, or trying to. I mean, it's questionable whether gambling's ever going to be a real kind of issue for the public. Let's face it. In 2019 in the UK, you should probably try and use less European examples, but I'm going to go with it. There was, in every manifesto, there was basically a kind of copy and paste line about gambling. It's kind of replacing analog legislation with something for the digital age. And that was exceptional, because gambling traditionally wasn't really kind of a manifesto thing. It wasn't like a doorstep issue, So it's
you don't lose votes by saying we're gonna crack down on gambling.
Well, this is it. But then again, you don't necessarily lose votes by saying this is an industry that's thriving, and we should probably kind of look at supporting it and making sure it's channeled into the kind of the sensible way of doing it. But I mean, I suppose my kind of slightly rambling point here is that
I was wondering if there was going to be one.
Oh yeah, there is one. It just kind of
how long do you actually have left? Not long.
No, we've only got a few minutes left.
So if anyone joined listening to this hoping for some detail on Brazil, you've now just had a lesson in the history of the manifestos of the different political parties in the UK.
Yes, and
sorry, your point was?
Oh yeah, the point. Yes, yeah. I mean, if I'm allowed to desperately find it.
Did you sleep on the plane today?
I didn't actually sleep that much. Maybe got about 3 hours sleep on an 11-hour flight. But my point was,
the rest of it wasn't preparing for this podcast, was it?
It wasn't actually. No, I was watching a very good TV series about an assassin, and doing some other work. Okay. I've got more things to do than just this podcast, believe it or not.
Well, if you eventually finish it, you'll be able to start it.
My point was, because of this perceived public pressure and the pressure from government, it's not even so much the regulators. I mean, when you actually look at what regulators are doing, regulators are an instrument of government.
Yeah.
Regulators are, to an extent, a bit of a buffer zone. But as you see in the Netherlands, and as it's like we're seeing in Brazil, it does feel that work is increasingly being derailed by politicians that think there is an easy answer to a much more difficult question.
Yeah, and they look, the regular. I don't know. Hopefully, I'm not making this number up. I think the SPA is like 12 people trying to cover this industry that's $5 billion US, plus potentially who knows whatever else illegally. It's just tough, and trying to register. All these brands that are now there, the legal market, trying to get more. It's a tough job, and have mistakes been made? Yeah, probably, but it took a long time getting to this point, and I think you need to give them a break because as soon as they try and do one thing, then you have this welfare issue again, well intentioned, but you've got 560 people, in the House, and then you've got the Senate, all these different political parties, trying to get anything through it, and they don't know about gambling. They don't really give a shit. They're just going to go, it makes sense. Why would someone on benefit? Why should they spend that with? I don't want to keep saying the same operators. KTO, Galerabet, whoever you want to pick. But it's just naive. And then with what happens online as well, you then got to look at the bills now about the land-based. So there's people saying to me, it's definitely going to pass this year. We've got this, minister or under minister or whatever you want to be that's massively behind it. It's like, come on, how long did it take when did we first start talking about Brazil regulating? I mean, it was years ago. And then land-based, they go, oh, it's fine, it's resort casinos. No, resort casinos is in Japan, where you have 3 of them that are pretty much catering to foreigners. I think there's going to be 20 to 25 because that's a local market. That's a locals market, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, well, there are going to be international hubs, and there are going to be, it's almost going to be 2 kind of classes of casinos. There's going to be like similar to the US, the regionals and the kind of IR style resorts. But the thing is, I mean, but
that makes it harder to pass. You're trying to put everything in, and then you try and put in the same bill, bingo, and then Yogo de Bicho. I mean,
and then horse racing, and then just like anything.
Why don't we chuck all the controversial shit there is into one bill, try and get it passed at a time when everyone's talking about gambling anyway, and is there too much advertising, and everyone's being sponsored by and having restrictions, and then try and push all the shit we've been trying to do for years into one bill, and we're going to get passed by the end of the year. You nuts.
The thing is, I mean, look at Pennsylvania. That's a good example of an omnibus bill that worked. Because it did. It got a lot of stuff through in one go. But the problem is you've had sports betting, then latterly sports betting and iGaming, and that kind of passed. And then the instinct isn't to then regulate more. I mean, like we've seen this, in the US and honestly in some European countries, you legalise one product and it's kind of like, hang on, let's just see how this goes first. There is, I do think there is value in that kind of omnibus approach, but it does need to be everything in one and painstakingly done. Because Pennsylvania is probably the best example of that, at least.
Yeah, but there's a million more where it hasn't. I mean,
yeah,
let's quickly talk about the US before we run out of time.
Yeah, that's a good
just
idea.
Because of what's happened today.
Crunching handbrake turn, but yes, let's go for it.
Well, no, so and you linked into it well. So it's like let's regulate one, then the other. So all these states regulating sports betting.
Yeah.
And I'll hold my hands up. H2, we were wrong when we thought a lot of them iGaming will follow. It's natural. I mean, why wouldn't you? And it hasn't happened.
No.
So what's happened with iGaming? You have all these sweepstakes casinos. So sports betting, illegal sports betting you're not going to stop in the US because like the kind of high value players here, people transact with their bookies. I mean, I've spoken to people who have been gambling with a local bookie, a legal bookie, for over a decade, have never given them any money because it's like, we have $1,000 credit. So if I'm up 600, down 600, no money changes hands. You do the transaction online. But the people they're transacting with online, you can't even find them on Google. They spend money to be hidden. So you can't do. It's not like in Europe. So it's more like in Brazil. So sports betting is just going to happen on the radar. You don't have that same relationship with iGaming. So what do? People try and get around it. You have these sweepstakes casinos where it's not gambling because they're tokens. And then, funny enough, you can do something to translate it to real money, and I think.
And lo and behold, you can then take out a load of money. I mean,
and the Illinois court with an unnamed social casino, or state.us, it's out there.
It's out in the news.
They're looking to shut it down, and that's the thing. You cannot stop it. So at least with the US, these brands are well known. They're publicising themselves, and so they can go after some of them and shut them down. I mean, more will pop up. But
Yeah,
Brazil, it's just not. It's not the case because you don't even know the brands you're going after.
One of the interesting things that someone much better informed than me said that...
Is that Kyle?
No, it's not actually in this case, but yes, he is generally much better informed than me. No, I was talking to someone that I've known for a while at the Indian Gaming Show in San Diego last week. Yes, last week I was in San Diego, this week I'm in Sao Paulo. So I'm going around all the Saints.
Such an international traveller.
I know, I'm just so jet-setty. I'm so tired. My back hurts so much. But they made a very good point about the whole sweeps business. You know, if these companies are really going to become kind of established and endemic into that market, why has no one tried to acquire one?
And that's a very good point. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, because you're going to spend 2 times EBITDA trying to acquire them, and then some federal judge just shuts you down, and then you're completely screwed, and you've just wasted. Well, I mean, I don't know how much money they're making, but you're still going to be spending hundreds of millions of stuff because they're just making a shitload of money, and it's all going to get shut down.
Well, this is it, but the issue is that there hasn't been like a Black Friday moment. You know, like you think back to April 2011, there was an absolutely clear, unambiguous line in the sand. You know, like the axe came swing down. Some of the companies basically ran around like the hair was on fire. Some of the other companies, you kind of felt like they knew that this was always a possibility and they knew exactly what they needed to do. And those companies, you know, kind of, you know, endured, survived, thrived, and ended up getting back into the US market, you know. But there hasn't been that moment.
Yeah, but the difference there, so let's say, right, poker. No one in the US, any of the states, went after them and said, what you're doing is illegal. Because they just wouldn't be able to, like, the argument of a skill, whatever, you know, it just wasn't. Mm-hmm. So they got done for, wasn't a miscoding of transaction. No, it was effectively, you know, the whole Al Capone thing, do it, you know, with financial side of things, can't prove what they're doing is illegal. Mm. But, you know, the lawsuit today, you know, the sweepstakes casino, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give and I wouldn't give a view on this anyway, but, you know, they were setting out their argument pretty black and white as to why this is completely illegal. And then you move on to the the sports betting
not sports betting allegedly.
Sorry, not
the
sports
predictions.
betting.
The predictions are kind of like commodities.
I mean, and this is in a relatively well-regulated market, the US. I know it's state by state, but then you still have this whole mess. And then if you bring it back to LATAM, you look at other things like state by state, like Argentina. I mean, yeah, it's all provincial and I get states' rights and all of that, but you know, it's just a mess. You know, there's very few people who get licensed, and there's a huge illegal market.
Well, the issue with Argentina, as I understand it, is with Buenos Aires city and province. Like so much of the kind of population and capital is concentrated there. Mm. It's like these other kind of smaller jurisdictions. You know, there's not really as much kind of value. But I mean, on the predictions thing, that's kind of an interesting one because that's. I mean, you kind of feel that some of the kind of like appointments and some of the kind of, for example, in one of the companies, like the board member being the president's son probably doesn't hurt the case. Depending on
I'm not sure we're going into that topic.
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into kind of like presidential nepo babies, but I mean, I suppose really it's ultimately going to come down to how much they kind of favour that child. But obviously we've got the CFTC hearing at the end of this month. We are in April. Yeah, we are. That's good. And that could be a Black Friday moment for predictions.
Yeah, and look, I think it's, quite frankly, you've got these companies who have spent a lot of resource doing legal sports betting and building their brands. I mean, well, there's kind of 2 who have made it work, but you've also got companies who've spent an awful lot of money trying to build 2 brands, and both of them failed miserably, but that's another issue.
Yep.
But you know, and they're just having someone else just walking, Robin Hood or whoever, just walk in and go, yeah, we don't need to bother with all this state-by-state legislation, get partners, we'll just go and do March Madness betting across every single state because we think we found a loophole. I mean... Well,
yes and no. Because if you think about how that market has sprung up and how that market has grown and the companies that have thrived in it, they were in this position. Think back to 2016 onwards, Daily Fantasy Sports. There was a lot of questions about the marketing, about the legality,
Yeah.
whether it needed licensed, and ultimately, let's face it, the companies involved in that have,
Benefited from the
done really well.
I kind of feel we're getting onto something we should be speaking about in Fort Lauderdale. You're not going.
I'm not going to Fort Lauderdale.
Thank fuck. Does that mean Kyle's going to be a good host then? Are you doing it with Kyle?
Hey, I think you'll have to.
Yeah?
I think you'll have to. You'll have to do it without me.
Okay, I'm sure we'll manage. So let's try and finish off on Brazil again. So,
Yes.
what are we doing? So what's,
Final thoughts.
What's the outlook? So we're continuing our player surveys. We're continuing to track all the legal traffic, the kind of visible illegal. So, on a monthly basis, we're trying to give brand awareness on the quarterly basis, as well as player behaviour. Why people are using illegal sites.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting one. So, higher value players are doing it because of actually the better product and odds. The lower value players, ease of use.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're going to be changing our survey to include things like I'm not allowed to bet with legal ones, which will clearly be huge if you've got a quarter of the population, 20% of the population who
Mm-hmm.
are soon going to be banned from doing any kind of betting whatsoever. Web traffic to try and track how all the operators are doing. And we did market share before, but it's more annual, and we look at the top 5-10 operators in a market. Now we're 70, 80 operators on a monthly
Mm-hmm.
basis. It won't be perfect.
No.
Web traffic doesn't directly correlate to GGR, but it's nice for people to keep track of what they're doing, share voice, affiliate traffic. So it's really just try and keep as much current, up-to-date data on the Brazilian market to try and support subscribers or other people in it, but then also try and get some data points, some tangible data points to work out this shit show of the illegal market. And so actually when a number comes out, hopefully it'll be ours, working with different market participants. It's one we can point to and say, we have some basis for this. And then that's a starting point for the industry and the regulators to work together to try and change the channelization. But, final point, do I think in 3 years there's going to be 90% of the market onshore? No, not a chance. Do I think land-based is going to be regulated by next year? Not a chance. Even if they pass a bill, how long is it actually going to take for it to happen?
Oh yeah, what's 4 to 6 years after this long? I think
4 to 6 or 46, because it could be easy.
Well, the original bill came out in I think it was 1991. Is that correct? Yeah.
Hang on, this is a data source in the corner. We're fact checking.
Yeah, we have our LATAM expert in the corner, Liliana Costa, off camera, and just trying to get us to wrap this up, actually.
Yeah.
But the original bill...
No, she said I could keep talking.
Did she?
Yeah.
All right, I'll go then. So the original bill, it came out in 1991. And now it's finally moving towards passing. So what's another 4 to 6 years?
Okay, so I've been learning Portuguese for 3 weeks, and I can count to 10.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to be more than that in terms of land-based opening?
More than 10 años, or años. I think it's going to be a menor, which is less, I think.
I do. I think it's going to pass. I think to actually then, one thing passing it to get the regular. Let's say it all. Let's forget about Yoga de Bisho. Okay. If Yoga de Bisho passes, the whole infrastructure's there. That's launched from tomorrow. It's already launched. Yeah. So that's forget about that. Whether that passes or not, I don't know.
Fantasy sports in this equation.
I think it's a pretty tenuous comparison, but yeah, okay.
Oh yeah, it's there, it's established, and it's a case of just adding in.
And if you're an international operator trying to come in the market, you're not going to get that. So just forget about it. So that's whether that's technically legal or not. I'm not qualified to talk about that, and also don't want to upset those people. So forget about that. Bingo salons, it doesn't take long to find the regulations around it. May take a bit more time from passing the bill, but it's pretty quick to
it's a case of bringing them back. Let's face it.
Yeah, they were already here before. People doing fun, but casinos, especially if how many people, it's like the way you're going to do it, and we'll build them, and also then it's like the arguments about where they're going to be and the population and so so. Yeah, I think they'll be legalised in well under that time.
Mm-hmm.
Will 20 casinos be launched and live in 10 years? Time goes a lot quicker than people think.
So I think we'll have temp facilities. I think there'll be temporary facilities that will evolve into much bigger, beautiful, jazzier venues. I think that's how it's ultimately going to go. I think that's true of a few markets. I think you're going to see kind of kind of like similar to in Chicago what Bally's has done. It's got the kind of like the temp casino while it builds the big full service one. See something like that happening.
And then is that an opportunity for foreign companies, US companies looking at it? Because no US companies have really come in. Yeah, well, I mean, it's Flutter a US company now. I mean, it's moved. But no, not traditional. You haven't seen all of the big ones. Well, I suppose BetMGM, yeah. But in terms of are you going to see this as an opportunity for the likes? I mean, Hard Rock. That's they're kind of in LATAM. That's probably one where they'll be looking at it. This is the kind of
for casinos.
Yeah.
Like you look at the US operators. Of the ones that are thriving, one of them, Flutter is going to kind of very soon have, quite a big stake in the market when it acquires that majority holding in NSX, so the Bet Nacional. DraftKings has obviously, said kind of like fairly consistently they're not looking at international expansion. Whether that changes, it's like if they see some kind of far-flung, land that holds opportunity, then you could see that changing. Will that be Latin America? It's hard to say. You've got Rush Street Interactive. They've been doing business in a few different markets.
LATAM, they're pushing that.
So there is kind of some, but it's more kind of international. Like you look at the companies that maybe held back in the US, like Bets, and were quite kind of light touch in how they kind of engage with the US market. They've obviously got a big
focused on
here.
LATAM. Yeah.
Well, exactly. They've always had a big focus here.
So final point, and talking about LATAM, this is something like with all the monthly stuff and questionnaire surveys, I think for us, LATAM's a big, we cover Europe well, we've got our US stuff, pretty damn good if I'm being biased.
That was a really muted plug.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're an understated company. We don't like to show off. We don't even do marketing. I don't know why we've got a media partner, but anyway.
Do you? Who's that?
But look, I think LATAM's a big focus, which with jet lag's a pain in the ass. But you do have to come over here and see people and you learn stuff. And you guys have got a good team over in LATAM, which helps. But we're kind of doing that across LATAM, and I think it's a big focus. Peru, Chile, places that are regulating as well as ones that have regulated. Mexico and stuff. But I think for me, the final point, what'll be interesting on Brazil, let's put the illegal market aside. Clearly, I admitted that I don't really know much about it. If anyone says they know loads about it, they're probably talking bullshit. But the legal market, the one thing I find quite, I don't want to say amusing, it's rude, but in Brazil, everyone goes, people like international operators, they try and come here, gringos, they try and come here, and they know nothing about the market, nothing. It's like, well, hang on a second. Let's look at the top. Let's look at the biggest operators in the legal market. Yeah, Bitano, are they Brazilian?
No, they're not.
Bet365, Brazilian. Superbet, Brazilian. Sporting Bet, Brazilian.
You say that, but the brands might not be traditionally, but the teams there is exceptional local talent.
Yeah, and when you don't have that, as Sporting Bet found when they were telling us that they're a market, not telling us, telling the wider investment community, so listed company, and saying, we're the biggest brand in Brazil, and it's like you're not even 10% of the size of the biggest brand in Brazil. And they didn't have any local people. As soon as they did, they grew their revenues, I think, 45% last year.
So
you have good local people.
When they have brought in some good talent.
But my point is, that there are international operators who have been successful and the market leaders here. There's now a lot of local operators who are growing from a low base. And because I'm sad and I like data, what I'm quite excited at looking is tracking our data and seeing how much of these, how much they're growing, and how much of them do take it, and whether these international ones that have had a head start can maintain that, or if these local ones are just going to come and suddenly the market share we're talking in 5 years' time is going to be completely different to what it looks like now.
That's an interesting point.
The difficulty we have, I come over here and it's like, I'm from H2, and they're like, poker company, because there's an H2 here, which is very frustrating. So I was so obviously I have an interest in them, so I was looking at them. We've got them at 0.9% market share. They'll probably disagree. But there's other ones. There's so many of these operators around that kind of 0.5% to 1.5% local operators. Yeah, and there's some, bigger ones. He's talking, if you're looking at kind of, 777 and, KTO, Glarabet, all those Bet National, who are already there. But there's a lot of companies, and I think there's going to be some that do it well, and I think it's interesting to kind of track those. And the suppliers, that's a question we get is, which of these small operators? Yeah, we supply into all the big ones. Which of the smaller ones should we be focusing on? Which are kind of growing? And it's too early to tell. I mean, we're not getting our March data until next week. But I think over the course of the next 12 months, you'll really start to see which ones are doing well in this market and which ones aren't. And if they kind of view that you really need, the Brazilians have this big advantage because they really understand the market. Yeah. If you see that start to come through, and look, when you are a market leader at the moment and you can afford to sponsor all the big team, when you can afford to sponsor the whole of Rio Carnival, that obviously gives you help with brand awareness. But
Serie A
But you can spend a lot of money on marketing and waste it. So which local operators, kind of truly local operators, come through and really start to take a podium position, I think will be really fascinating.
And I think that's probably about our fifth final point. So that's probably a good place to end.
Yeah. Well, and I think the local operators that do will clearly be the ones that subscribe to H2's data. Yeah. H2GC's data.
H2GC's
data. Yeah, so, given that market intelligence that do it. And also, they clearly, have a whole division just looking at IGB Brazil, just to get the local news flow.
Well, this is it. I mean, you did mention earlier a media partner, and I understand you are partnered with a reputable and well-established gaming media brand.
Right, well, this half-hour podcast has not been half an hour.
No, it has not.
I think we're doing 15 minutes up to a maximum of half an hour.
Yeah, we have failed miserably there.
If the editing team can take out a bit about the manifestos in the UK, that will probably cut down about 13 minutes of it. But it's been great to talk.
It has been good to talk. It's fun to do this. Have we even actually said what this podcast is called?
Right to the Source.
There we go.
Which, in Portuguese, right to the source. And what's it in Portuguese?
Vai à fonte.
Vai à fonte.
There we go.
You should be thanking me for coming. You're the host.
Am I?
Yeah.
All right, well, in that note, I will thank Mr. Ed Birkin for joining me in this incredible podcast studio. Sadly, I don't think the production values are going to be as good on it going forward, because this is absolutely fantastic, and obviously a huge kind of thank you, muito obrigado to the team at Brazilian Lounge. They've been very welcoming, and so we're very grateful for being allowed to take up 51 minutes of their podcast studio.
Yeah, I'd just like to also thank, again, Brazilian Lounge.
Are you going to do it in Portuguese?
Muito obrigado, equipa, tudo equipa, Brazilian Lounge. It's a great studio. I believe Clarion's, I think we're in discussion, are we still, about Clarion's podcast budget to get something similar in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, once we get the green screen and the kind of the morph suits with little tennis balls on them.
This is more for the production team, but clearly we don't have our own graphics yet. Do we have an intro?
Well, we will do when we put the episode out, so this is totally moot. I'm cutting this bit.
Oh, I suppose by the time it gets edited, it's going to be August time, so we've got plenty of time to do that.
Kind of December-ish.
Yeah, it's great when we're talking about 2 months of data, 10 months later.
Yeah.
And the longer we make this, the editing's going to be much easier. So
exactly,
wrap it up.
Yeah. All right, so, everyone, thank you for listening. Sorry for rambling, and we will be back sooner than anyone can expect on Right to the Source with Robin Harrison and Ed Birkin. Thank you.